I was under the impression that I would be giving you guys a Garth Brooks concert at the beginning of the week. And so I had recently watched this video of this pastor, and he was praying at the end of his sermon, and he actually stepped off the stage and fell. And that's like my biggest fear. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to mess with any foreshadowing that was happening here. I'm just going to stay with the concert. So this week, we're going to be in Psalm 23. And I have actually done a ton of research on sheep this past week. I know you can thank me after the service. I know this is what you've been longing for, just to know about sheep. But in the Bible, God's people are referred to as sheep over 200 times. So for us to know what the significance of that is, we've got to research sheep. So I've done it for you, no worries. So sheep are notoriously known for being not intelligent creatures. Is the best way I can put it. They're notoriously known for being dumb, essentially. And so basically we get that from sheep will follow each other off a cliff, and we think that they just mindlessly just follow each other with no rhyme or reason. But researchers are actually coming to find out that they have a lot of survival skills, a lot of social preferences in how they function. So, for instance, if a sheep is by himself just grazing a pasture, and he looks up and he sees that no one is around him, he'll start to get stressed. He'll start to freak out because he naturally needs to flock with the rest of the sheep. It's called like herd mentality. And so sheep value friendship. They value community. They actually can know each other's faces, trust each other, and so that's how they flock together. They trust each other. They form friendships. They form strong bonds. And so they don't mindlessly tag along, but they are the product of social preferences in a world where the group gives mutual support. So you may be wondering, how do humans connect with sheep? Well, it's pretty obvious. Humans, none of us want to be running this race and look up at any point in time and see that we're alone, that we're not running this race with anyone else, that we are just on our own. That's because we are created to be social beings, that we're created to be in community with each other. We're created to have friendships. We're created to flock to people. And so this is how we see sheep and us as the reference point here. Not the same, but why we see we're called sheep. And it's not because sheep are unintelligent, therefore we are unintelligent, but it's because sheep don't understand the wholesome life that they can have, so they do their own thing. Therefore, the sheep need a shepherd. And so if the sheep are not paying attention to the shepherd, the sheep are not letting the shepherd guide them and lead them into a life that is full and wholesome, then that is when we say that they are not intelligent. And that is when we get referred to them. And so a shepherd, they lead sheep, they guide them, they protect them, they feed them. Whatever that flock needs, the shepherd is there to provide it. And so in Psalm 23, we see the good shepherd for us, that we're called the sheep of this flock, and that we also need a shepherd, that we need a good shepherd. And so if we want to go ahead and flip to Psalm 23, we are going to look at the good shepherd that we have. Since we've come to terms with the fact that sheep are social beings just as we are social beings, that sheep end up in places that they never could imagine, with people that they didn't see themselves with, in the same way that we do the same thing. So now that we've come to terms with being called sheep, now we can flip to Psalm 23. So Psalm 23 reads this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This text is not a text that you probably haven't heard before. It's probably you've heard it multiple times, but the word is living and breathing. And my prayer this morning is that even though you've heard it however many times you've heard it, this morning you can grasp something new, that it can speak something new to you. And so there's 3 big pictures from this passage that I want us to look at. And so number 1 is the Lord is my shepherd now. The Lord is my shepherd now. And so verses 1 through 3 read, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Those verses alone, we could spend an entire day talking about. But what I want us to see here is that the creator of the universe is being represented to his people, the character and the position of a shepherd. The character and position of a shepherd. Being a shepherd is honest work, was honest work. Like I say that and I act like I was a shepherd in my past life. It was honest work, I promise you. Their job was to provide for the flock. It was to feed the flock. It was to protect the flock. If the flock were to stray away, one in the flock were to stray away, it was to go get that one. And so during this time, young sons of farming individuals who did not inherit land became shepherds. So the lowest of the low, and then also young individuals were shepherds. And so we see right off the bat that the great love and commitment that the Lord has for his people to care for their every need could be communicated in a position that was well known to the least of these. That the honest work of a shepherd, that everything a shepherd does, the Lord does for his flock, like the shepherd does for their flock. It could be communicated to the least of these. But the best part of these verses, by far, is the my. The Lord is my shepherd. David didn't say that the Lord is the world's shepherd or the Lord is someone else's shepherd, but he says the Lord is my shepherd. He protects me. He watches over me. He cares for me. I shall not want because the Lord is my shepherd. Not I shall not want because the Lord is someone else's shepherd, or this I shall not want because the Lord is my shepherd. Charles Spurgeon says this. He says, the wicked always want, but the righteous never. A sinner's heart is far from satisfaction, but a gracious spirit dwell in the palace of content. That when the Lord is our shepherd, when we say, the Lord is my shepherd now, that we are content. And like we'll look at later, that all of our desires are fulfilled. That we are content, we live in a palace of content. We don't want for anything. We are satisfied fully. And so the second big picture is, in the good and the bad, the Lord will always be with us. In the good and the bad, the Lord will always be with us. So verse 4 says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And so this verse has been sang, spoken, preached, whatever you want to say, at funerals, at dying believers' bedsides. This verse is constantly read during those times. But what in the world does it actually mean? It seems pretty fearful. The valley of the shadow of the death seems like a lot. It seems like something I would definitely fear. Like, what does that mean that we say it so often? It's something that's always in our everyday lives when we experience something tragic. Let's break it down a little bit. Think for a second. It says, even though I walk. Okay, walk. What do you do when you walk? All right, you walk. But anyways, I think of some examples. So scary walking haunted house. That's just where my head goes. So illustration being a haunted house. Think about that for a second. How you would move throughout a haunted house. For me, I just recently went to one, so it's fresh on my brain. I'm like a creeper, so I'm like creeping around every corner, like looking to see like when the next jump scare is. And then as soon as I see it, then I'm like gone. There's no walking through that for me. I'm like fast walk out of there. Or I think about like an airport. Every dad in this room knows that there is no walking in airports. Why? Because you have to get to the gate 3 hours early just to make sure the plane didn't leave you. I expected that joke to hit a little bit more. It did not, but why? Why can't you walk through an airport? Because you have to know that your destination is still there. You don't know what's coming next. When we walk places, when we walk through life, we know where our destination is. We know exactly when we're going to get there. We're not having to walk faster, walk slow. We just walk. We just are. Even though I walk, we know the destination. And then the next part, through the valley of the shadow of death. Believers are walking through this broken world, broken, sinful world, but it is not their destination. They are walking through. The shepherd is leading them through something else, leading them to something else, something much greater. It's not the valley of death. It's the valley of the shadow of death. This is super important to the understanding of this verse that says shadow. What's one ingredient that's needed to make a shadow? It's light. That the light of Christ has made death a mere shadow. That we don't walk through the valley of death. We walk through the valley of the shadow of death because shadows cannot overcome us. That Christ has already defeated death. That we walk because we know our destination is greater. That we know our shepherd is leading us to something greater that he has already prepared for us. And this world is a mere shadow compared to what's greater. What our final destination is. That even though I walk, I will not fear. Because it's not a valley of death. It is a valley of the shadow of death. The rod and staff of Christ comforts me because he is walking with us through those valleys. He is there for us in the good and the bad. The last big picture is the Lord's presence fulfills all of our desires. The Lord's presence fulfills all of our desires. Verse 5 and 6 says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. King David, the psalmist, the one that is writing this psalm, loved being in the presence of the Lord. He loved being in the presence of the Lord. Anointing dinner guests' head with oil was an old ancient tradition of hospitality during this time, that the host, when the dinner guests would arrive, would anoint their head with oil. That was just how they showed hospitality. And oil can also be found other places in the Bible as being referred to as joy. And so King David is imagining himself sitting at a table that the Lord has prepared for him. And his enemies are pulling up seats to sit at this table, but it doesn't matter. He does not care. He is full of joy because he is able to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That he has been anointed with this oil forever. His cup is overflowing with the joy that he feels just being in the presence of the Lord. Now you think about enemies at a dinner table pulling up seats at your table. The jealousy, the envy, the competitiveness, if you want to overcome that enemy, whatever it might be, David says none of this matters because the presence of the Lord is far more than enough. And just like David, we get to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That we are anointed with this oil, that our cup will overflow with the Lord as our shepherd. So that leads me into what's next. How do we see the Lord as our shepherd? How is this even possible? Like, of course I want my cup to overflow. Of course I want to be anointed. Of course I want to be all of these things. I want to feel that he is mine. How do we do this? So in order for us to see God as our shepherd, in order for us to just see him as this, we have to get to know him. We have to get to know him. If we're not getting to know him, then we will not see how he provides for us in our day-to-day. We will have no idea. Think about it this way. You have Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be, social media platform where you have friends, okay? We all have those friends that we don't know, but like we know from afar. So we know everything there is to know about their kids. We know where they like to vacation. We know what they've been going through. We just know everything, what they did this past weekend, whatever that might be, we know that about them. But if I were to ask you, do you know so-and-so? You would say, no, I don't know them. I know a lot about them, but I don't know them. This is the same thing if we are not getting to know God, that he might as well be our Facebook friend that we know a lot about. Because we don't know how our Facebook friend is there for us. We don't know them at all. Or we think about in times of grief in our valleys of life. We call on people to be with us that what we know, that we trust, that we have a relationship with. We don't call on our Facebook friends that we know a lot about, that we see every other post. Why? Because we don't have a relationship with them. We don't know if we can trust them. We don't know if they're our sheep in a flock. But we have to get to know God by getting in his word, by praying. Because when our darkest valley comes and someone says, you know, you're going to get through it, God's with you. You're like, I mean, is he? Is he? We have to know him in order to know that to be true, to know that he's the one guiding us through this life. Number 2, we have to find ourselves falling more and more in love with being in the presence of God. We have to find ourselves falling more and more in love with being in the presence of God. Just like King David, the psalmist loved being in the presence of his Lord. And we must get to a place where we do too. A place where we can imagine ourselves sitting at a dinner table with all of our enemies pulling up seats around us, and none of that matters. None of who's there with us matters, because the presence of the Lord is enough. The presence of the Lord fulfills our desires. I think everyone in here can agree that if they were to be invited to a party where they knew no one, this is just hypothetical. Like, I realize the person that's inviting you to the party, you probably know them, but just say you don't know them. You have no idea how you got invited to this party. You know no one, okay? Your first thought is going to be, how do I get out of this? No one wants to go to a place where they know no one at all. They don't know how anyone's presence is. They want to be in their presence. If we don't know them, we don't know if we love hanging out with them, if we love being in their presence. So if we aren't getting to know God, then how can we ever fall in love with being in his presence? And that leads me into the next point. If we are not studying his word, praying and listening, then we won't know him and we won't be content in his presence. Just like Charles Spurgeon said, that the wicked always want, they're never satisfied. But the righteous, the ones living in God's presence, they dwell in a palace of content. We have to be studying his word, praying and listening. It is the only way that we will have a relationship with him. And it will go from knowing a lot about him to also knowing him. And lastly, we have to keep our eyes on the Lord. There's so many times that we find ourselves in places that we could have never imagined. With people that may be far from God, the moment that we find ourselves in places that we didn't see coming, undesirable places, the moment when we see ourselves or find ourselves falling off the cliff, that we are the ones falling off the cliff, and we're like, how did I get here? Looking down makes it really easy to follow the people around us. Looking down makes it really easy to see what everyone else is doing, go with that, trust those people. Go with that guidance. Whatever you feel like is necessary, that's what you go with. That's easy, is when you're looking down. But when you're looking to the Lord, it makes it easy, really easy, to follow his guidance for our lives. That if we're not looking to the Lord, then we don't know where he's guiding us. We can't guess that. We are social beings that get just honestly too busy in life, looking down and following our flock. Because we're created to be social beings, we naturally flock to others. No one wants to run this race alone. And we struggle when we find ourselves looking down and following that flock instead of looking up and following the lead of the shepherd. See, it's not sheep. The flock of sheep don't walk off the cliff when they're looking to their shepherd. They walk off the cliff when they're looking to each other. It's when their shepherd is there to protect them and guide them and lead them, is when they're safe. J.I. Packer, he says this. He says, guidance, like all God's acts of blessing under the covenant of grace, is a sovereign act. Guidance is a sovereign act under the covenant of grace. Not merely does God will to guide us in the sense of showing us his way, that we may tread it, he also wills to guide us in the more fundamental sense of ensuring that whatever happens, whatever mistakes that we make, we shall come safely home. Slippings and strayings there will be, no doubt. But the everlasting arms are beneath us. We shall be caught, rescued, and restored. This is God's promise. This is how good he is. This is how good he is. That the grace of God is so good that he allows guidance to be a sovereign act. That when we walk off that cliff, that his everlasting arms are underneath it, catching us fall. And that is his promise. That is how we are rescued, restored, and caught. We have to keep our eyes on the Lord. in order for us to know that he is our shepherd. The bottom line for today is that we have to get to know God more and more. I wish I had another answer for you, but that's it. It seems so simple. We have to get in his word. We have to pray. We have to have a relationship with him. I love that last month we were in our Heaven series, and that directly after Heaven series was our Knowing God series. Because the difference between heaven and hell is a difference between knowing a lot about God and knowing God. And at the end of the day, we can know every answer. We can know a lot about God, whatever it might be. But if we don't know God, if we don't have a relationship with him, then that's the difference between the valley of death and the valley of the shadow of death. That we're walking in shadows with our Savior, walking right next to us, or we're just walking in the valley of death. So this week, I challenge you to explore whether or not God is a Facebook friend that you just know a lot about, or whether you know him. Because like I said, that's the most important concept. That's the difference between heaven and hell. We cannot know the Lord is our shepherd if we have not experienced him in a relational way. So I challenge you to ponder that this week. But we also know that the church is to equip the saints for ministry. So that is you guys going out and seeing people that we will never see, that you are going to spread the gospel to. And for you to know that that is also the difference between heaven and hell, is knowing a lot about God and knowing God when you're interacting with the people around you. This is a relational faith. Let's pray.